Greetings, this is Chrymzon, bringing you a discussion of two topics in one video for the second installment of the series. The first half will be a short overview of what I expect to see implemented for the Elder Scrolls 6's combat system, while the second half will be dedicated towards magic. So let's begin. Combat in the Elder Scrolls is not exactly the most appealing when compared to other games. However, in the Elder Scrolls Online there seems to be an acknowledgement of this fact, which is why they decided to implement dual-wield parrying and the capability to dodge. These are both systems previously introduced by mods on the Nexus. This more than likely means that in the next installment they may decide to incorporate these mechanics, which I have no qualms about. However, something that I do have qualms over was slightly addressed in the previous video. In Skyrim, Bethesda removed hand-to-hand combat as a skill. I believe this is due to them wanting to maintain this false sense of balance, but why couldn't the skill have been thrown into one of the existing perk trees? I wouldn't mind if there is just one perk in one-handed or pickpocket that would allow for an unarmed character to be a viable playstyle. I don't want to have to rely on an enchantment for this, and many Morrowind players complain similarly about the loss of spears and throwable weapons. I understand why Bethesda didn't want to introduce spears because it would have taken time to model more weapons and create more animations, but for throwable daggers, why didn't they just reuse the assets that already exist? They could have just made it so that if the player right-clicks their mouse with their daggers out, they would throw them in the direction they are pointing towards. It would make sense considering they removed the capability to block when dual wielding. If they do this in the next series, dual-wield pairing could be used for short swords or one-handed weapons, but daggers and dual-wielding daggers could be thrown. It would definitely appear as something new and unique. Additionally, it would bring about numerous new playstyles. This way they would not need to make a completely different set like they did in Morrowind, and throwable weapons could easily fit into the archery perk tree. Spears would also fit well within the two-handed perk tree if they ever decide to make a return. Another option I wish to see return to the series is the ability to fight while underwater. I'm not sure if you noticed, but slaughterfish are incredibly annoying. I understand the mentality that it would be difficult for most characters to fight with melee weapons and archery if they are in water, but that doesn't explain why magic is not an option. The player could even use their bare hands if necessary, plus there's also the existence of Argonians, that playable race that is literally capable of living within bodies of water. On another note, I would completely support the reintroduction of weapon durability. This concept has a place within the Elder Scrolls, but I can also admit that it tends to get annoying after a while. This isn't particularly something I am too passionate about, but I thought it was an intriguing idea to use this in the survival mode that I hope Bethesda makes for Elder Scrolls 6. I would also hope that they make survival mode its own option rather than a difficulty setting, unlike what they are planning to do with Fallout 4. Unfortunately, these are all the ideas I currently have towards the improvement of combat. Since combat isn't exactly the focus of this franchise, perhaps I'm not as critical as I could be, but I believe that combat serves its purpose within the series for the most part. Now let's get into the next topic concerning magic. The first point I wish to bring up is actually with concerns about the food within Elder Scrolls. Either Bethesda should allow for food to once more be used as possible alchemical ingredients, or they should simply buff food in its entirety. The only time I ever pay attention to food is if I have a survival mod installed. Perhaps Bethesda could add in some form of a cooking perk to the alchemy tree and even spices to the game that could further improve upon the concept of cooking. My next point is something I particularly feel passionate about. Bethesda needs to add in the possibility to craft scrolls and staves in the next Elder Scrolls. It would also be wonderful if they allowed for scrolls to have more than just one usage, similar to the effects of enchanted items within Morrowind. Once a scroll is used up, they would simply disappear like in previous games. Basically, they could just turn scrolls into triggered enchantments. One character build I have always wanted to create is one that doesn't use any form of magic at all, and simply uses magical items. Implementing this in some form would be amazing. In Skyrim, they even allow for the character to chop wood and gather ink and blank papers scattered across the entire province. These are all the materials that one would need to craft both scrolls and staves. Perhaps they could make it so that the player needs to use a specific type of gem with their staves, which will dictate either its efficiency or element in some form. Clutter has far more potential than what they have been used for in previous installments. Thankfully, we have already seen some of this being implemented in Fallout 4. Another important implementation that has been left out is spellcrafting. This is one of the cornerstones similar to that of the arenas within the Elder Scrolls series. It is something that helps differentiate it from numerous other titles out there, yet both arenas and spellcrafting are missing from Skyrim. In the previous video, I went into detail of how the concept of overpowered should not even exist within this franchise, which is why I don't even care if there are exploits involved with this particular skill. Spellcrafting allows the player to utilize magic in a way that is true to the very essence of magic itself. Also, players should be allowed to decide on their own novice spells at the beginning of the game. If I am roleplaying as a character that focuses on illusion and does not care less about the destruction school, I should be able to start off with illusion spells. If they actually bring back major and minor skills for the next game, it could solve this particular dilemma by still making the decision automatic. Even though this next point isn't exactly about magic, I feel that it belongs in this discussion. They should return the ability to choose a birth sign at the beginning of the game. If the character is born under a certain sign, NPCs should be able to acknowledge this fact. The birth sign should remain with the player throughout the entirety of the game. However, standing stones should also return, have them act the exact same as they do in Skyrim, and change the player's birth bonus to whatever stone they choose. The problem is that removing birth signs is similar to taking an entire section of the lore and throwing it into the jaws of a Daedroth. So let's talk about those old mysticism spells. Things like Absorb Health and Absorb Fatigue should be brought back and placed under the Alteration School. They could also possibly be put under Restoration. It really depends on what Bethesda plans to do with their reworking of the Restoration School. It is possible that Bethesda will want a section of the Restoration tree to turn into something that targets interactions and damage with the undead, while the other portion will deal with healing just like always. Whatever the case, another thing I want to address regarding these two trees are the wards. Instead of wards instantly breaking if they haven't been put up for a long enough time, there should be a new specific type of ward that is based around the player's timing. If the player puts up this particular ward just before they are hit with an attack, it should reflect the attack back towards their target. This way, reflect spells can make a return to the series in a very intriguing way. This concept of mine was inspired by the super guard within Paper Mario Thousand Year Door, and I hope that the mechanics would work in a very similar fashion. This could also add to improving combat significantly. Wards could easily be placed in either the Alteration or Restoration schools. Once again, this decision is up to Bethesda because I don't particularly care one way or the other. However, my personal point of view are that wards appear to fit the criteria for Alteration more. Within Daggerfall, there is a possibility for the player to pick up unknown magical items that have to be identified in order for the character to properly comprehend what it is. This would be a wonderful addition to the next game. They should also add in cursed items similar to Hircine's ring. If the player equips it, the weapon cannot be removed unless they visit a priest or deity, and it gives them debuffs towards their health, magicka, stamina, and possibly attributes if they return. It should also be possible to purify the item yourself if the character is at a high enough level within Restoration. Perhaps they could even add a perk specifically for this. One of the more obvious decisions Bethesda should make is to turn some effects from Dragon Shouts into actual spells. The most obvious spells that could be carried over are Become Ethereal, Marked for Death, Disarm, Drain Vitality, but instead of draining stamina and magicka, they could turn it into draining stamina and health, Slow Time, and Whirlwind Sprint. Instead of Whirlwind Sprint acting like the shout for Skyrim, it could simply be a buff to the player's movement speed. All of these would be welcome additions to the Alteration School, and it would definitely make it far more worthwhile to invest in. Both Marked for Death and Disarm also have the potential of being put into the Illusion School. Necromancy is the next topic and probably the most important discussion for me within this entire video. It is about time for Necromancy to branch off into its own school of magic. Either that or for Bethesda to vastly improve upon the Conjuration Tree. I wish to be able to summon undead, for example, ghosts, zombies, skeletons, wraiths, bone lords, and flesh atronachs. Skyrim is an incredible disappointment specifically for necromancy, considering that the only thing actually available to me is to use existing dead bodies, which would disappear if I even dared to combine it with an atronach. Plus, there should be even further improvements upon the necromancy system. Something I definitely want implemented in some fashion is the ability to use body parts and clutter for necromantic spells. Perhaps I could combine a certain amount of bones together with a troll skull and summon a troll skeleton, so it isn't just simply a spell that is cast like other schools of magic. Maybe I need to have items in my inventory for my necromancy spells to properly trigger, so if I don't have enough body parts or correct body parts, the only thing I would be able to utilize are wisps or ghosts that are not as powerful as their bone or flesh variants. Furthermore, I would appreciate it if they bring back the Necromancer's Moon so the player could create black soul gems. They don't necessarily need to bring back the altars because an enchanting table would work just fine. Perhaps they could even add in some form of indicator for these events, like a calendar. A calendar would be extremely helpful within the Elder Scrolls, and it would allow the players to properly keep track of the heavenly bodies, which is something I have always wanted to do in detail. Speaking of a calendar, they should also bring back the holidays that have been left out ever since Daggerfall. They don't necessarily need to bring back all of the holidays, but it would be nice if they allowed for those that are important to the specific province that the next game takes place in. Maybe they could even give the player the option to give their character a specific day to represent their birthday, if they do actually implement this system once more. Hopefully you have enjoyed watching the videos and have your own thoughts on these ideas. I will be happy to respond to your comments and look forward to your engagement with these discussions. Thank you for watching, and I look forward to seeing you all in the next video.